before on Hume and Buchanan. And this paper is basically a follow-up on that first paper of Hume and Buchanan. And the title is a play on something that David Levy exposed to us a few years ago. So Smith, not Hume, is Paul, not Jesus, Jesus, not Paul. Yeah. Jesus. Not Paul, Jesus. But is, you have to tell me what it is, because I forgot.
It's Jeremy Bentham and Francis's place in attempt to reform Christianity. To make Christianity safer utilitarianism.
Okay, thanks. But the idea was that you focus more on one than the other. It's the wrong focus, and focus more on Jesus? No, Paul than Jesus? One of the two.
Yeah.
And so what Andrew and I thought, well,
clearly she's not a scholar of religion.
Or at least Christianity.
So the point of Andrew and I is to look at Buchanan and the origin of public choice, and there is a lot of focus on Hume, and we're saying, well, maybe that focus is misplaced. We should look at Smith more, and this is why the title was a play, very bad play, on David's work many years ago. So this is the basic idea that we've heard in part from Pete, in part from others today, that public choice is, as Buchanan would say, politics without means. And the very good commercial version of it, like the democracy version of it, is politics without means. Or going back to Hume, the idea that every man ought to be supposed to name. So that's what Buchanan would claim, or people who claim Buchanan would claim, being the origin of public choice. So you suppose that everybody's a knave, politicians just as much as people in the market. So you use a self-interest in the market when you buy a car, just like the politician uses self-interest when he gets an office. So you take the romance out of politics and you have public choice. And if that is the assumption that you use, then you're going to have to consider the fact that politicians are not necessarily public spirited, and you want to have institutions that are made free in order to have functioning. So that's the standard story that we usually hear about public choice. And as I mentioned, and also like Pete mentioned right before me, there is a tendency to attribute that claim of everybody of public to their name, this founded intellectual foundation of public choice, which is a sentence from David Hume. So David Hume is considered the father of public choice. But Andrew and I are questioning that claim, or at least to look at Hume as the only father of public choice. It's a limited understanding of it. And if you want to be a little bit more pushy on this, we may also start to consider what exactly is the role of Hume in public choice, if at all, and why is he considered officially or unofficially a foundation, intellectual foundation of public choice? Because it may not be, or it may not be in the way in which it is commonly presumed. Well, our claim is that Adam Smith sounds more in line with public choice in the Buchanan sense than David Hume's. So that's the main claim of our paper. And the reason why we want to say that there are more problems in considering Hume a public the intellectual foundation of public choice and Adam Smith is because there are major differences between Hume and Buchanan. There are many more differences between Hume and Buchanan than between Buchanan and Smith. The whole idea, the whole project started over a decade ago, actually, David was doing work on robust institution and made the claim that public choice and James Buchanan were within that kind of understanding. The public choice looks at robust institution, so that you look at worst case, the worst that can happen, and you try to avoid it, as opposed to best case scenario in which you try to achieve the best possible outcome. And so David made the claim that public choice is within this robust tradition, and James Buchanan is part of this robust tradition of looking at worst case scenarios. So Andrew and I were like, okay, is that true? And so our first work was to look at how Buchanan hold up to worst case scenario. And we saw that Buchanan hold up to worst case scenario most of the time, but not all the time. And indeed, there are situations in which when you actually push him to the corner, he backs up. And he relies on public spirit. Things that David Hume, on the other hand, doesn't do. You can push David Hume all the way, and he still doesn't rely on public spirit. Buchanan does. So that is basically the background in which Andrew and I started to work on this paper. So the question that we had was, well, why is Hume so predominant in, if you want to say like the bumper version, the bumper sticker version of The Origin of Public Choice, you look at David Hume. But why is that the case if there are differences major differences in sense between Buchanan and Hume? And on the other hand, is there somebody else who resembles more the presentation of Buchanan than David Hume does? And I work mostly on Smith. And I was like, you know what? I'm reading Smith and I'm reading things I hear in other contexts. And so the Smith that I read is a Smith that has a lot of similarity to Buchanan. So much so that also Smith, just like Buchanan, when you push him to a corner, relies on public spirit. So the parallels between Buchanan and Smith, to me and to Andrew, are much stronger than the parallels between Buchanan and Hume.
Could you say what you mean by public spirit?
Yes, I'm going to see in a second. But basically is the lack of reliance on self-interest. So the politicians are not always names for the system. The assumption of we are always names is relaxed, has to be relaxed by Buchanan in order for the Constitution to be enforced. Things that for Hume he doesn't have to do it, Smith does as well. So that's the public spirit. It's a relaxation or going back on the assumption that, well, not everybody is a name. I would be happy to take questions as I go along as opposed to at the end, or as far as the end, but I'm happy if you want to interject. So, in a sense, why should we care? So the so what question is a question that should be asked in this context in particular, because we're going so far back, in a sense. So it's not something that is relevant for today, unless you understand why this kind of questioning is relevant. But if you do want to develop or maintain a free and responsible society, what do you have to do? Is indeed the constitutional constraints, constitutional checks enough? Are those enough to maintain a free and responsible society? Or are you going to be pushing a corner and to reach a point in which you're saying, no, those are not enough? And if those are not enough, what do you need to maintain that kind of free and responsible society? And if they're not enough, Buchanan and Smith as well seem to lead to a possible answer of the virtue of religious state, public spirit. And on a general methodological question, in a sense, we go back to the problem of Malthus not being a Malthusian, or the fact that there is a Thomas Malthus and other Malthus in a different context. But here you have somebody who claims to be a Humean, or somebody who is claimed to be a Humean, but it actually does not follow Hume. And so, well, not completely, but not as much as we would expect for being labeled Humean. So what do we do in this situation? Where does this Hume label come from? And why Hume and not Smith? Those are questions for which we don't have answers at this point. And I'm happy that there are so many people who have been involved with Buchanan and for a long time, so hopefully you can help us figure out why Hume and not Smith explicitly at least. So what I'm going to do, and I apologize because the other day I was talking to Lauren about PowerPoint, and I usually don't do this, but in this case I need to read, and I want you to read through, because what Andrew and I have done is look at where Buchanan actually is citing him and what he says about him. So this is from the Calculus of Consent. And it's a very long quotation, but you have to bear with me because it's an important quotation. So Buchanan and Talbot in Calculus of Consent say, Hume states that the purpose or aim of the checks and controls provided by the political constitution should be that of making it the interest even of bad men to act for the public good. It is in this respect that the conception of David Hume appear most helpful, and they seem to have much in common with our own. Our basic analysis of the individual calculus that is involved in choosing among alternative organizational rules in selecting a political constitution has demonstrated that it will often be to the rational self-interest of the individual to select a particular rule that can be predicted to produce results on occasion that one counter the self-interest of the individual calculated within a shorter time span. By shifting the choice backward from the stage of specific collective decision to the stage of the constitutional decision, we have been able to incorporate the acquiescence of individuals to adverse collective action into calculus that restrain economic dimension and that can still be analyzed in non-moral terms. In this respect, our immediate precursor is Hume, who quite successfully was able to ground political obligation neither on moral principle nor on contract, but on self-interest. And then the quotation goes on and says, it's a long one, but bear with me. Hume did this by resorting to the idea that the self-interest of each individual in the community dictates the observance of conventional rules of conduct. These rules, which may or may not have been formalized in contract, are necessary for the orderly conduct of social affairs. This argument, which does not base political obligation on contractual obligation, allows the primary difficulty of the contract theorist to be neatly surmounted. Not only is it to the initial interest of parties to agree on conventional rules, if such rules do not exist, but is also to the continuing interest of individuals to abide by the conventional rules in existence. Hume recognizes, of course, that where it possible, the individual's own interest would be best served by the adhering to the conventional rules of all other persons but himself while remaining free to violate these rules. However, precisely because such rules are socially derived, they must appeal generally. Hence, each individual must recognize that were he to be free to violate convention, other must be similarly free, and as compared to this chaotic state of affairs, he will rationally choose to accept restriction in his own behavior. This is from the Calculus of Consent. This is the appendix to the Calculus of Consent. It's a very, very end of the Calculus of Consent. And it is the only place in the Calculus of Consent where Hume is cited. I am actually very pleased that Pete mentioned that Reason of Rules was most likely drafted as a sequel of the Calculus of Consent, because this is the second place in which Buchanan cites Hume in Reason of Rules. Using the home economicus behavior model in constitutional analysis and justifying this use on analytical rather than empirical grounds is a procedure we have borrowed from our classical economist philosophers in their analysis of political institution. And we can perhaps do no better than than in this connection than appeal to David Hume. And this is this quotation from Hume that we always hear. In constraining any system of government and fixing the several checks and controls of the Constitution, every man ought to be supposed a knave and to have no other end in all his action without interest. And that is it. Andrew and I were not able to find that there is actually one more citation of Hume. But basically, it's about 3 times in the whole corpus of Buchanan, or at least in the collected works of Buchanan, that Hume is cited. It's like Liberty Fund allows us to search only for these 3 times. That's it. And we don't know, like, are these, maybe it works in a sense in the same way as the visible hand of Adam Smith. Adam Smith also cites the visible hand 3 times, and this visible hand has become the flagship of Adam Smith, so maybe this works in the same way. So basically what Buchanan studied us is that you have constraints that allows you to check bad people, perfectly standard public choice story, which is not really similar to the Hume story. Besides the quotation that is often presented, the fact that every man ought to be considered a knave, David Hume tells us indeed that the antient constitution is a solid constitution built on check and balances. So a knave is able to constrain somebody else's knavery because of the division of powers and the check and balances of the society. So far the story is great, right? There's no problem with this. But the problem comes immediately after. Because if this is the only story, then it's perfectly reasonable, I think, to consider Hume the father or the intellectual father of public choice. The problem is that there is a major difference between Hume and Buchanan, which, in a sense, goes back to the word's original question. Who enforces the rules? So if the Constitution, according to Buchanan, is what allows to check knavery, you need to have somebody or something that enforces the Constitution. And this is a problem that does not go unsolved, that does not go unaddressed. So this is Gordon Tullock that in the 25th anniversary of the publication of Calculus of Consent writes the fact that there is a problem with the Calculus of Consent. The problem is that the government can be bound by this provision is naive. Because something must enforce these rules, and whatever enforces them is in itself unconstitutional. What are the solutions that Buchanan proposes? Public spirit. And that's, in a sense, what we mean by public spirit. So Buchanan recognizes the problem that to enforce the constitutional rule requires something that is not a self-enforcing constitutional rule in a sense. And you either assume the problem away, according to Buchanan. So there is one crucial assumption, which clearly underlines the whole constitutional construction that of unconstitutionality. So you either assume the problem away, or you have to lean on a constitutional attitude, a proclivity or tendency to examine issue from a constitutional perspective as opposed to pragmatic, short-term, utilitarian perspective. What does that mean? It means a new civic religion. It means that perhaps more important than formal constitutional changes are changes in ethical attitudes that would make attempts to reform workable. It means that formal constraint on behavior as laid down in legal constitutional structure can never alone be sufficient to ensure viability of such an order. An underlying set of ethical norms. So again, here you're not relying on neighborhood any longer. This is an ethical norm that replaces the assumption of neighborhood. Is essential. This is not a step that David Hume makes.
Is there a difference in that? Is this wrong? Is there a difference between the sort of the design phase and the sustainability phase?
Yeah.
For the and so while you were speaking, I mean, you have also Hayek is on your side. As Hayek and Individuals in Economic Order is in the quote, it's amazing what these things can do. I have a book. I can't read it, but he has a great line. It says, in Individuals in Economic Order, page 11. He says, the main point about which there can be little doubt is that Smith's chief concern was not so much with what men might occasionally achieve when he is at his best, but that he should have as little opportunity as possible to harm when he's at his worst. Right? Which is the same kind of system. And he attributes it to Smith, not to Hume. But I'm wondering if in this debate, the discussion is whether or not you have a designing of an institution and then the sustainability. And what happens is that they follow Hume on the designing, but then they recognize for the sustaining, they can't have it be, you can't design it to be purely self-enforcing under those same assumptions. So therefore I have to relax in order to get it to sustain. Okay.
But even if that is the case, then why not follow Hume all the way? Because like Hume tells you that you are for Hume the Constitution is enforceable. He doesn't have the problem of enforceability. Why? Because he relies on neighborhood all the way down. And so you attempt to take power because you're a knave. By your attempt to take power, you're stepping on my feet. I'm a knave too. I'm going to block you. Right? So it's that kind of check and balances that allows the Constitution to be enforced. And Buchanan sort of it disappears. It's not, at least not as it's not explicit.
So if I can just follow, so Danny Roderick now has a new paper that's circulating around. It's going to be forthcoming in Journal of Economic Perspectives. And it's on the whole relationship between ideas and interests. And the way he tries to address it is that ideas generate a constraint within which interests play out. So if the idea constraint is, let's say, here, then the interests are going to play out only up to here. But if I push them out to here, then I can get further. So if I think about the ideas, and so at one level what Buchanan is talking about is the idea constraint about wanting to, like I quoted in my paper as well, where he says, we have to have a general consensus that it's okay to leave things alone. If we don't have that, then we're always going to be making these other things. And I'm wondering what the play is between, so when I'm trying to bind the interest, I talk about countervailing forces. But I have to recognize that there has to be some kind of general attitudes, right? And so the ideological origins of the American Revolution, let's say a Bernard Valen book, is important for constraining the set within which the constitutional project takes place.
I can buy it, but I don't believe that is parallel to Hume.
Yeah.
Or at least you're relaxing the assumption that everybody ought to be considered a knave. And if that is indeed the starting point, then you have a problem because your starting point is not met.
I'm pretty sure that Hume doesn't believe in knavery all the way down. The only classic political theorist he does, and I know of, is Kant, where he famously says the political problem can be solved even for a race of devils, provided that they're intelligent. But what Hume says, he says several things. First, he never says that people are knaves. He says you should suppose them to be knaves. This is a useful fiction. Later on, in the treatise, he says, I wish I could quote it exactly, something like, though everyone may have greater love for himself than for anyone else, scarcely anyone is concerned more for his own interest than that of everyone else together. So people are not self-interested exclusively or even predominantly in this sense. And then he goes, in the treatise, he develops, of course, a theory of virtue. And this is an account of people being by nature virtuous. It's not like Smith's moral sentiments, but in particular, he there discusses the kind of unusual virtue of justice, which is, and he calls it an artificial virtue, where the problem then is that although we naturally have affection for others, we don't naturally have an affection for justice. Why do people follow the rules of justice when they do follow the rules of justice? And I think he gives an account of why that is. So the knavery thing, I think, is a red herring here. There's a whole lot more to this concept than there is a homo economicus.
Absolutely.
All right.
I agree 100% with you, but that's exactly
So why didn't you want to co-author with me, Maria?
Next thing.
All right.
All right. No, but the problem is exactly the point that you brought out. That the Hume is, in a sense, is more complex than the bumper sticker version that is always cited. But what is cited is everyone ought to be considered a name.
In philosophy, there's the most famous statement, moral philosophy, also uses the word knave. I don't know if economists read it, where he talks about the sensible knave.
Right, yeah.
You guys know this one. And the problem then is, of course, people will agree to these rules, but then with what reason does the sensible knave have to follow them? That's the other bumper sticker.
But it's not the one that is used.
It is by philosophers. Because that's the question, why be moral?
Right.
Which we've been doing forever. But, and most of the philosophers that I talk to, they don't know your knave quotation. So there really is a disconnect between the two worlds.
Or names from trade.
This is my agent. He'll work out. How long?
What percentage does he want?
Yes.
So, in your presentation, you were assuming there's a contradiction between self-interest and morality. So, if we're assuming that people are self-interested, that doesn't work all the way down. Therefore, we're adding this morality thing. But in Buchanan and Talk and all the other books, there is this idea of uncertainty and the veil of uncertainty or ignorance. And that's what determines people to accept rules. Because they're uncertain about their own position in the future, so they cannot predict exactly what kind of arrangement will profit them. Therefore, they agree to something more general. But the same argument works for morality. So morality can be understood as a heuristic that helps us deal with uncertainty. So I'm not sure it's okay to make this, to assume that self-interest and morality are contradicting each other or supplementing each other. They're more complementing each other.
So I think that the problem of the veil of uncertainty goes back to Pete's point before, is the problem of designing the Constitution or enforcing it. So the design of the Constitution is done under a veil of uncertainty. The problem is once you have a design, what assures you that you're going to enforce it? You can always change it, and that's exactly the problem that Tyler brought up.
But it's the same thing. It's uncertainty. It's something that's ongoing. So that's why you're not changing it. Because if you're changing it, you're threatening your own interests.
That's not how Buchanan presents it, though. So the
Yeah, but you're assuming that he is assuming this radical distinction between self-interest and morality.
I wouldn't present it as self-interest and morality. I would present it as knavery versus public spirit, because those are the terms in which it's presented. And
What
this
if
is like one
public
of the
spirit
problems
just
that
results from knavery?
Sorry.
What if public spirit results from knavery? Okay, you are a knave, but because you are a smart knave, you are going to do stuff in the public interest.
That's not the best thing you can.
That's not
You can.
right. Thank you.
Or,
Yes.
and it's not,
Do you have more that you want to?
Yeah.
I want to make sure you get through your.
Okay. Can I just take Michael's first? Yeah.
You might enjoy looking back at Christian's passion for the interest. And also, there's a book by Rooney about 11th century Italian culture.
Neighborhood. Sorry.
It's a great read.
Okay.
And it sounds like the way he writes it, it's an environment in which what you're talking about might have a better chance.
Okay. But one of the problems that Andrew and I are struggling with is, in a sense, is like, why is there a stronger link between Buchanan and Hume? Whether it comes from Buchanan directly or from secondary literature, we are not quite sure. And it's more likely that it comes from the secondary literature than from Buchanan himself. But Buchanan had some research years ago when we was to the Gymnasium presented a list of 10 thinkers that influenced him the most. And Hume was not on that list. Smith is, on the other hand. We did check. We were able to trace the article down. It's actually published in Better Than Clown. It's reproduced better in Better Than Clown. And just by, again, like doing a word search, so Hume is cited 3 times in Buchanan. Smith is not. Smith is cited several times. Sometimes it's cited in price theory, sometimes it's cited for other economic, like strictly economic reasons. But enough times is cited, in a sense, in the public choice context. Again, a lot of it is actually in reasonable rules, which I was so thrilled that the dimension was drafted much earlier than 85. Because it makes, in a sense, our case much stronger. That is not something that, you start from Hume and then somehow you realize, maybe there's more.
It's also, it's not Jeff Brennan,
Yeah.
right? It's Buchanan, independent.
Yeah. Right. How long do I have?
so Brendan stole it?
Right.
So, 5:05.
Okay.
There's technical comments.
With comments or without?
Then comments after that.
Okay. And I was asking because there are several citations of Buchanan, of Smith that Buchanan has. And they're all linking Smith with institutional laws. And they're all of Constitution, the importance of the constitutional context or the legal context. So the great intellectual discovery in the 18th century was when his order in the market, discovered the structure of rules, the structure of rules, law, institution, and physiology. And then again, you have, at least since the 18th century, and notably since Adam Smith, the influence of rules, Smith's term of laws and institutions on social outcomes has been understood. And this relationship has provided the basis for a central theme in economics and political economy, particularly as derived from their classical foundation. If rules influence outcomes, and if some outcomes are better than others, it follows that that to the extent that rules can be chosen in the study of analysis, comparative rules, an institution cannot carve out attention. And then again, there are several citations where, or several places where Buchanan is explicit in recognizing the role of Smith. And here is another one. There are several. Limits of liberty as another very strong claim that Adam Smith has really won a claim as a father of political economy because of he and his compatriots proposed genuine constitutional revolution, and the proposal were in large part adopted over the course of half a century. So these are all places where Buchanan is looking at Smith in an explicit way as a foundation of his program. And then I look at actually Adam Smith, like, okay, so Hume is more or less what is claimed to be. So as Lauren said, there's more to Hume than what is claimed. But is there something in Smith that justifies his presence or his larger presence in Buchanan's work, even if it is understated? And so we looked at Smith and we saw that, whoa, Smith has a lot in it that is parallel to what Buchanan is doing. Smith has a very strong theory of ransom. The merchant and manufacturers, the big merchant manufacturers, are an order of men who knew their interests very well because they're few and they know each other. And they're able to lobby for their own benefit at the expense of society. And they're able to do it because the member of parliament are happy to give them monopoly in exchange for support, which sounds very much like a public choice argument. The member of parliament who support every proposal for strengthening the monopoly is sure to acquire only a reputation of understanding trade, but great popularity and influence to the order of many. Those number and wealth render them of great importance. So again, like you have exactly the same story that you would have in a standard rent-seeking story, rent-seeking public choice theory. So you give favor to the politician gives favor back to you. And the politicians are happy to do it because they look good. They're able to achieve more support. And it is the private interest that is going to prevail in determining laws and political outcomes. So to expect something that is good for the country is not necessarily to have a good expectation, because those expectations are not to be fulfilled. The private interest is going to be stronger. And so to expect, for example, that abolition of certain laws are going to take place is utopic. So it's not going to happen. Because there are irresistible interests that are going to oppose it. Here's the part also that for us is extremely interesting, because Pete gave us before this wonderful citation from Theory of Moral Sentiments that the problems of government is to try to constrain bad behaviors, which again sounds like public choice and just Buchanan. But just like Buchanan, Smith backs up. When you push him in saying, well, is self-interest the only thing that you need? Smith says no. You can rely on your self-interest to have effective rules. So Also, Smith leans on public spirit at the very end in order to have a functioning government. So the legislature's deliberation ought to be governed by general principles which are always the same. And those general principles are not principles of interest, are public spirit interest. And the men whose public spirit is brought up together by uniting benevolence to respect established power and privileges, even of individuals, and still more of those great order of the society to which the state is divided. So you follow the rules of the state because of public spirit. So then you have Hume Smith that takes a position that is not too dissimilar from Jim.
I just want to point out that quote, and I think it's important that in that last sentence, it's not just the state, but it's the great orders and societies, and it goes back to this issue that Pete Betsy raised a footnote about if you have sort of an unequal society, then you're sort of in a different situation than if people are more or less so. So I think that's an important element that comes into Smith in the last part of The Wealth of Nations, that there are these great orders and societies present, and his analysis in book 5 of education and all that's going on. So I think that's a non-trivial part of what he's up to. It's probably different from Buchanan in that regard. I want to raise that. I don't know, but I want to raise that issue.
I don't know. I don't know how much different from Buchanan it is actually. Is it?
When you have these great orders of society, which the state is divided, I mean that's
The thing is,
social
the
classes and ranks.
for the great orders of societies it's just like this, the society itself, right? It's not like major differences in societies.
That's a very weird sentence. Public spirit is prompted altogether by humanity and benevolence. Who's that? I can't imagine any such person creeping into the public choice center. And it looks like something you do as part of a reductio, but in fact, no one has public spirit altogether prompted by humanity, benevolence, or these other self-love and the like. So I don't know if you would say something about the context of that. Calls for civic religion.
Yeah.
If I were objective, so I'd call this a line now.
I will bet you, I'll give you 10 to 1 odds. It was Brennan who was I'm telling you stories about Ash Wednesday at the Public Choice Center. You know that?
I know the story about it. It's almost simple.
So I'm gonna get to you in a second. Because I just want to conclude so that we can be sure that my very last question is exactly asked. So what Andrew and I are wondering is why Hume and not Smith? Or why Hume and not also Smith? Or why not Smith? What brought Hume to such a prominent place, and why is Smith very seldom mentioned in, at least in the popular discourse or something like this? Because Buchanan cites him significantly more than Hume. And so this is the struggle that Andrew and I are facing. Why Hume and not Smith? Given that it seems that it should be Hume, Smith and not Hume. Sorry.
So I was going to say the context of that Smith quote, what Lauren was asking about, he's contrasting that, right, with the man of system or with the party man, right? He's saying that when there's faction fanaticism, most men will, try to avoid candor, will be caught up in appealing to their followers, but there will be a few, ideally, that are like this, and this is the ideal man that Smith talks about, who in some ways is able to avoid some of the divisions created by faction and fanaticism. Not that we need this person in particular as the ideal politician to make the system work. It's sort of a contrast, not like this is what all politicians are like, but there are some men that fit this description.
Maria, is this your last?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure because I'm getting a very long queue. All right, so I am collecting names now. Go ahead. Do you want to briefly respond to that one?
No, thank you. Okay, bring it up.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Hume. Please put your hand up if you want to be on the queue.
Maria, there are sort of two stories in this paper that I seem to be getting there. And it's in Smith and Buchanan as well, I suppose. So on one hand, you can go with the story that says, and that's what I thought your presentation seemed to present in that fashion, that you need there's a certain ethic requirement for constitutional design to be possible in the political state. And in a society where that requirement is not being met, then you actually Buchanan would have to go back to Knight, because Knight had this view where he sort of argued that economics is a science, and economists they reach that science reaches its limits at the border of what he thought of progressive societies. Beyond that, beyond the progressive societies, economics would not say much. And so if you go with that, if you go with the first story, you don't have to let the requirements, you can't design the whole constitutional project becomes suspect. You sort of get at it, you're back in Wall Street junk, and you don't know how to move out of it. But there's the other story in there where Buchanan is, I think, hinting at it. Smith has it in his own, in the form of anecdotes in the Wealth of Nations, and I think that is Buchanan is talking about this new civic religion that needs to emerge. And in some sense, so if you think of constitutional design, that at the design stage, if you recognize that there's certain type, that the lack of a certain type of ethics should be taken into account, that one can come up with a constitutional design that recognizes that certain types of ethics don't emerge. And once you get the minimal constitution going, over time, the ethics that emerges, and Smith has this idea that certain type of ethics emerge as a result of the market society. And so it's sort of a story over time that emerge as an endogenous rather than an exogenous.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I don't think I disagree with what you're saying, with either of the two accounts. The problem still remains that the bumper sticker version of the original public choice is every man ought to be considered an aide, or ought to be supposed an aide, attributed to Hume. And if that is the case, you run into two problems: that Buchanan doesn't stick to that assumption all the way, and Smith has more to say than Hume, of course, just by looking at what Buchanan says. But regardless of what Hume actually says, by just looking at what Buchanan says, there's more in Smith than in Hume. And so we're still struggling with the problem of why is Hume and not Smith? Or maybe we should just, for whatever accident of history, it happened that he has a catchy phrase, so it's put on. But then if that is the case, it should be revised just for intellectual honesty, because it's not Hume, but it's actually Smith, more at the foundation of the
If we look at broad sweep of political theory, we could distinguish, and I know this is crude, those theorists who think that the political task is to make better individuals, and that's the whole of classical political theory, I think. And those individuals are pretty much fixed. The trick is to change the environment in which they work. The modernist tradition of Hume and Smith, I think, incorporates both of these going on. The virtues of the citizens is pretty important still. I think it doesn't come out so much in calculus consent, but I have a hypothesis as to why the follow-up book is never written. I think it's never written because I don't know if it's as early as 1970, but somewhat afterwards, Jim Buchanan is more and more worried about the inadequacies of the homo economicus model, is more and more worried about some of these traditional problems of the virtue of citizenry. Tulloch is not. Tulloch, would openly dismiss such talk. So I remember Buchanan and Brennan talking about this and how this, the model of calculus could nonetheless incorporate those sort of considerations. And I don't think the idea of civic religion is anything that's especially Smithian as opposed to Hume. Neither one of them was an avid churchgoer in terms of religion, but I dare say both of them knew that on a Sunday you could find a few names in the congregation. The question, though, is how at the margin people are to be moved away from that toward greater consideration of others. I was hoping I'd be able to say at the margin
With respect to this question of the sort of fatherhood of public choice, I have two thoughts. One is that you hold the members of the Public Choice Society, I expect they're no different than the economics profession, which means if it hasn't been written the last 10 years, it's not worthwhile anyway. They have that. But then on the other, more seriously, as between Smith and Hume, I wonder why you wouldn't vote for neither of the above and pick Benedict Spinoza, who Buchanan talks about in that first appendix, and that logical, philosophical, whatever book Spinoza wrote, was a kind of an analytical engine, I think, was more analytically oriented than either Smith or Hume.
Let me make, I guess, 2 points / questions. One, I guess, is maybe to raise the possibility that I think you alluded to about, well, okay, the invisible hand is only mentioned a couple of times, but because it's such an important image of being, it dominates. And this may be that, okay, to some degree, I think maybe Hume is the more fundamental philosopher, and that the sort of radical skepticism that I think you get underpinning the worry about knaves and sort of radical empirical skepticism of Hume, I think maybe more fundamental and more important, even if it's cited less frequently, and maybe these things that are specifically being cited by Smith, even if they're more frequent, are somewhat more epiphenomenon or sort of secondary issues that are added on, and that Hume really is sort of at the real foundation. And linked to that is also the issue, kind of this indirect fact that, of course, Hume has an enormous influence on Smith. So you've kind of got this, what's coming from Smith, or from Hume through Smith. So.
I see your first question is sort of who's your daddy question. The best way to picture it is public choice is promiscuous. So probably never know.
God says there's no need to know.
But the issue I wanted to raise was the debate I had early on. I was an outsider to public choice. I was introduced to
sort of public finance from Carl Schau, so we're very much in a quite different position. And he happened to mention, oh yes, and there's this stuff going on there. And then I talked to Brennan and a couple others, and I said, there's a real problem here. Sort of here, people can be self-interested. The question is, if you look at the calculus of consent, it's totally based, in sort of all the empirical work, everything that was done, is based on people having only that self-interest. If you give that up, you give up the foundations of there. Everyone was willing to say there's a blend. And sort of to add the rules later is a cheat in the same way, because now we're adding the rules, but then we no longer have the calculus of consent. So that's why I think it's in an appendix, is because you never would have gotten it out and sort of really been out there if you were reasonable to begin with. Now, Pollock had the wonderful advantage of never worrying about whether he was reasonable or not. Buchanan, however, worried about that. And that's why you see a difference between Buchanan and Pollock. Oh, one final thing, sorry about that. I think the resolution, so this is very much the same set of issues that they're dealing with when you see, behavioral economics and Nudge and talking about that. And I think the real answer to it is there are real two selves. So as opposed to sort of saying there's a single self, there's these two selves constantly fighting with each other. And if you picture it, you have the long-run self and the short-run self. And you can asking, can you impose reasonable, optimal constraints on one and the other in that fight? And if you structure the issue there, you have a rational two-person being there, then you can get all of this stuff coming out. The need for rules in the same way you have from behavioral on an individual level, you have on a social level. So I think that's where the real foundation has to be within that.
So I think Buchanan sounds a bit like Smith when they talk about the consensual contract between equals. And Smith spends almost the entirety of the theory of moral sentiments talking about the relationship between equals and sympathy between equals and so on. But the great smoking hole Smith leaves is when he talks about justice and beneficence. And he says that there are times when the superior is allowed to enforce rules of beneficence with coercion. And then he stops talking about it. And I think that's a kind of reasonable thing just mentioned now. Because Smith allows governments to coerce, subject only to their judgment and to rules of propriety that are loose, vague, and determined, that it grants a great deal of flexibility for governments to do what they please, as long as it's proper. And if Hume does not allow that, and then what that does is it continues to hold government agents to a standard that is subject to analysis of self-interest, as opposed to, well, it's proper that we do it, therefore we can do it.
Maria, this is very interesting. Not to belabor the point, but this presumption that everyone's an aide. If everyone's an aide, how can there be any public interest apart from more neighboring? And I think that's tied, whether or not that's Hume or not, I think that's related to this call in Brennan and Buchanan for the civic religion. And it strikes me that what that is a search for is something to fill the vacuum that's been left by the abolition of natural law. And my idea is that constitutional rules are not self-enforcing. There has to be a commitment that's deeper than the constitutional rules themselves, just as science depends on a commitment to the existence of truth. If we don't believe in truth, we can pretend to believe in truth for a while, and science would work, but sooner or later there's going to be no science. So I think they're facing a real problem, a fundamental problem, that perhaps in knowing that no constitution is self-enforcing. It's not going to be sustainable, it's not going to be stable, unless there's something more fundamental than the constitutional rules. And it brings to mind a comment I read in a book on natural law recently about the American founders, that they had a better theory of natural law than they deserved, because they were children of the Enlightenment.
I guess I have three comments. Let me go in reverse order here. With respect to the comment that was just made back about the government having the power to coerce beneficence, I just want to point out that the power to coerce beneficence that is in the part 2 of the theory of moral sentiments is only with the consent of the people. So it has to be within the moral sentiments of the people. And secondly, he ends the passage by saying, of all the duties of the sovereign, this is the one that he has to be most careful about, because to ignore it would result in what Smith calls shocking enormities. And the specific thing that he's talking about there is the duty of fathers to parents to take care of their children, to feed their children. And he ends it with, as I said, with that, this, of all the duties of the sovereign, this is the one they have to be careful about, because if you ignore it, then you would have, parents just leaving their kids out to be exposed to the elements and die. If you overdo it, it will be destructive of all liberty and justice. So it's a very, sort of a knife edge there, but it's constrained by the sentiments of the people. It's not at the will or the superiority of the sovereign. Okay? The other comments that I wanted to make with respect to public spirit, and also with respect to the idea of spontaneous order of rules, perhaps part of the problem is that Buchanan and the Constitutional Political Economy School missed opportunities to take advantage of Smith that were there, that you probably perhaps know about and understand better than they did. With respect to public spirit, just so happens that I have it because we were looking up the passage that Becky was quoting in the previous presentation. This is what just a few lines before in the theory of moral sentiments, he says, it's a long discussion. It's in the section on the role of utility and moral approbation. But he ends chapter 1 of that part of TMS by saying, nothing tends so much to promote the public spirit as the study of politics, of the several systems of civil government, their advantages and disadvantages, of the constitution of our own country, its situation and interest with regard to foreign nations, its commerce, its defense, the disadvantages it labors under, the dangers to which it may be exposed, how to remove the one and how to guard against the other. Upon this account, political disquisitions, if just and reasonable and practicable, are of all the works of speculation the most useful. Even the weakest and the worst of them are not altogether without their utility. They serve at least to animate the public passions of men and rouse them to seek out the means of promoting the happiness of the society. As we know, Adam Smith wasn't really aware of the Adam Smith problem himself. It didn't emerge until the century after he died. He's telling us right here what the Wealth of Nations is about. It's about arousing public spirit in the reader. So it's all of the what we think of as the content of analytical economics and the critique of mercantilism and the policy implications and so on. Sort of the positive program of the science of political economy has a public purpose because he's saying that it's going to arouse the public spirit of the reader. And so this relates back to your, so your very first or second slide, where you talked about, I think you had a bullet point about whether it's necessary to have virtuous legislatures. Well, for Smith, the answer is yes, very clearly, because the problem that he was addressing was the mercantile system was a politically corrupt system. So so there's and that I think relates to this. I don't like the concept of or the word like civic religion, but I think it relates to that thrust in what you quote from Buchanan and Tulloch about, because it's a similar sort of thing of arousing arousing a virtue in the reader. One more point. Very quick. Yeah. Okay. The other point I'll just raise it and not develop it because it requires more development. But the quotation that you have where you show them using Smith in terms of understanding the spontaneous order of the market and the necessity for the rules. Well, Smith had a lot to say about the rules themselves and how they arise, and there was a spontaneous order in the emergence of the rules themselves. And so he's, this idea of designing a constitutional order, in some sense, is kind of foreign to Smith, because the order that's being designed is a corrupt one.
Still got two people on this queue.
Thank you. First, I just wanted to reply to Professor Calendar's remark. I think the multiple cells apparatus is very interesting, but I think Buchanan explicitly rejects it in the first chapter of the Calculus of Constant, where they write that they really want to have a consistent model of the human behavior, and that's their aim with the book. I wanted to make two remarks. First, I'm not challenging Smith's influence on Buchanan, but maybe before disregarding Hume's influence, you would have to look more deeply into how this quote, or this every man ought to be supposed a knave, is kind of a slogan representing something that would be maybe political realism somehow. And so this would be, that's why it's not very highly quoted in philosophy, but if you go to political science, this is very important for them. And this is, I think, related to political realism. And then the figure of Hobbes would be much more important here. And so somehow there might be other authors that you would relate to political realism in this slogan that would have influenced Buchanan, namely Hobbes. So that was the first comment. The second one, it's more of a question. I'm wondering, what do you think about the idea that there would have been a shift in Buchanan's ideas around 1968? He hints at that in his essays, and Alain Marciano draws on this as his next paper that will be published in Hope in the next issue, as a decrease from Buchanan's perspective on the possibility of getting to voluntary cooperation, for example, because you see the events of 1968 in the West Coast, and then maybe he changed his view as to the possibility of voluntary cooperation, and so that might change his view also of public spirit as you use it, so there might not be a consistent Buchanan on this through his whole writings.
So David can confirm this for me, or Rick, but I believe that Buchanan had in his office a picture of Frank Knight and a picture of David Hume. Is that right? And Excel. Okay, so you might want to check that. So just visit the public choice and see if he has it. But what I wanted to point out is that when I'm referring to this calculus of control, then These are the documents for it, so I'll make sure that I send them to you. Because one of the things that's fascinating about it is the original document is actually from '69, and it's on an NSF grant under to basically pay for them to do this research. And what's interesting about it is there's a lot of things in here that relate to the conversation we had all day long. The necessity of putting there scientifically based, in this phrase, scientifically based elementary answers. That's what they're going to be striving to provide. But what they say here, which I think is interesting, is that the Buchanan and Tulloch, whose previously published work on the entitled Calculus Consent, proposed to change their focus and focus their effort on this new project to work towards some of the control problems that were more or less neglected in their earlier efforts. Provisionally, they plan a companion work to be titled The Calculus of Control. But if you look at the memo that Jim writes to Tulloch about what the first position is, now David Coleman get excited about this, it's on the issue of the individual and self-control or self-command. Buchanan became, as he says, he goes, my recent interest stemming from thoughts that came up while I was writing the Samaritan paper, so the Samaritan's Dilemma paper, has been trying to determine when is it rational for a person to deliberately subject themselves to rules as a means of forestalling their own undesired behavior, which is the conflict between this self and that self. And that becomes then, and that's point one in the memo to Tulloch. But what's interesting about it is he says, I know that I'm wandering a bit from our initial conversations and going in that direction. So that does fit with the Tulloch. Tulloch, I don't think, sees the self-command problem.
No, he sees it, he just doesn't care about it.
Yeah. I don't know, David could comment better, but I'll make sure I dated this. But it's interesting, this kind of, evolution of this argument.
Maria, I don't know if you want to compute everyone if we're answering one of these, or
I just thank everybody for the comments.
Is it dining hall or as you wish, on your own in whatever group study you want to consider. Tomorrow is T-shirt day, so please make sure you come ready to get your T-shirt. Between now and then, you can guess.